Reading Stalin's On Dialectical Materialism and Historical Materialism, inheriting and carrying forward the spirit of Comrade Mao Zedong's instructions, and dialectically viewing Stalin's philosophical thought. After reading Stalin's On Dialectical Materialism and Historical Materialism, I have a feeling, he is also a great Marxist. Why is Stalin so much worse than Chairman Mao? First, Stalin used the banner of dialectics, but his philosophical system committed serious one-sided metaphysical materialism. The first is that he creates connection and development out of thin air, ignoring the fundamentals, ignoring why connection and why development. Moreover, Stalin mistakenly placed the most fundamental and core point of view of materialist dialectics, the view of contradiction, in the fourth part, and only mentioned the struggle of opposites, ignoring that contradiction is actually the unity of opposites. Comrade Mao Zedong said when criticizing Stalin's erroneous thought, Stalin had a lot of metaphysics, and taught many people to practice metaphysics. He said in a concise course on the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Bolsheviks, that there are 4 basic characteristics of Marxist dialectics. His first talking about the connection of things, it seems that everything is connected for no reason. What is the connection? It is the connection between 2 opposite sides. All things have 2 opposite sides. His fourth article talks about the inner nature of things. Contradictions only talk about the struggle of opposites, not the unity of opposites. According to the fundamental law of dialectics, the unity of opposites struggle and are unified, mutually exclusive and interrelated, and under certain conditions, transformed. It can be seen that Stalin seriously reversed the order of dialectics and disregarded the primary and secondary. Why is there eternal movement? Why do opposing forces influence each other? Because of the contradictions within things. The contradictions between things are fundamentally the contradictions within things. The unity of opposites is the core of materialist dialectics. Stalin did not point out this, so he emptied dialectics. When discussing the relations of production, Stalin one-sidedly ignored the role of human internal factors, and one-sidedly put the tools of production first. Stalin also violated dialectics and made metaphysical mistakes. Stalin one-sidedly and narrowly defined dialectical materialism simply as views on nature, understanding of nature, and interpretation of nature, ignoring that dialectical materialism and historical materialism are completely one, and that dialectical materialism is also historical materialism. Materialism, historical materialism is also dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism not only studies and explains nature but also human society. Dialectical materialism not only studies and explains nature and human society, but more importantly, dialectical materialism can guide people to serve and transform nature and human society. Secondly, Stalin's philosophy was under the banner of materialism, but there were seriously wrong elements of historical idealism. Because Stalin fell into a fantasy in terms of dialectics, he also had remnants of an objective idealist view of history, ignoring that the fundamental cause of the development of social history lies in the internal contradictions of social history. His conclusion is that from development to development, from law to law, development because of development, serious objective idealism. Stalin said, the second characteristic of production is that the change and development of production always start with the change and development of the productive forces, first of all with the change and development of the means of production. Therefore, the productive forces are the most active and revolutionary factors in production. However, Stalin ignored a more important issue. The fundamental principles of Marxism have emphasized that laborers' people are the leading factors of productivity. Stalin put tools first, ignoring the leading role of people. Although he corrected his erroneous views in the middle, he over-advocated the role of production tools before and after. Stalin ignored the producer man's leading role in labor emphasized by Marx. Without human factors, how can there be an empty means of production, and how can it be used to transform the attributes of natural resources into production objects through practice? Stalin even made the mistake of an abstract human nature idealistic view of history. Stalin said, when some members of the primitive communal society were gradually groping for the transition from stone tools to iron tools, of course they did not know, nor did they imagine what social consequences this innovation would bring about. They did not understand, nor did they realize that the transition from stone tools to metal tools meant a change in production, which must have given rise to slavery. They only wanted to ease their labor and gain the benefit of the present sense. Their conscious activity at the time only limited to this narrow range of daily personal interests. The essence of human beings is the sum of social relations. and human social choices are mainly the result of the combination of social relations and human subjective tendencies, rather than abstract narrow human nature. Stalin fell into the idealist wrong view of history here. Third, Stalin's philosophical system has remnants of vulgar mechanical materialism. Stalin described the socialist society flawlessly, ignoring the internal contradictions of the socialist society, and planted the seeds of disaster for the restoration of monopoly bureaucratic capitalism in the Soviet Union. If the real socialist society was as flawless as Stalin's socialist society was, the bureaucracy and corruption in the Soviet Union would not exist. But the harsh reality proved Stalin's excessive optimism and utopianism. Stalin's fantasy is exactly the same as Tao Yuanming's Peach Blossom Spring's vision of Peach Blossom Spring. Stalin made a serious metaphysical mistake here, describing Soviet society as perfect, ignoring the restoration of monopoly bureaucratic capitalism brought about by pure top-down bureaucracy. If there is no supervision by the masses and no mass struggle from bottom to top, the public enterprises in the Soviet Union will be bureaucratic private enterprises, and the Soviet Union will degenerate into a monopoly bureaucratic capitalist empire. The remnants of Stalin's mechanistic and vulgar materialism are also manifested in the fact that he did not emphasize the decisive role of the superstructure on the production relations under certain conditions, and the decisive role of the production relations on the productive forces under certain conditions. Comrade Mao Zedong's On Contradiction profoundly emphasized this correct point of view. Moreover, Stalin's view that purely productive forces determine is seriously divorced from reality for China. China's socialist revolution can only liberate and develop productive forces by fundamentally changing the superstructure of production relations. Remodel. Fourth, Stalin's theoretical formulation was not rigorous enough, and he even referred to classes as classes. Stalin said in the original text, "Don't rely on social strata that are no longer developing, even if these strata are still dominant forces at the present time, but refer to strata that are developing and promising, even if these strata are not currently dominant." Strength. However, class should be mentioned here. Regarding the main driving force of social development, Stalin used class instead of class to ignore the basic principles of historical materialism. Fifth, Stalin unilaterally applied the four-stage theory, the full name is five-stage theory, and Stalin used four stages here, and insisted on applying the stage theory that only belongs to Europe to all corners of the country. According to the four-stage theory of Stalin's dogma, Stalin proposed, to avoid political mistakes, it is necessary to implement the discordant class policy of the proletariat, not to implement the reformism that harmonizes the interests of the proletariat with the interests of the bourgeoisie. Policies, not to implement compromise policies that allow capitalism to grow into socialism. However, different strategies were used in different periods and regions. In China, the victory of the new democratic revolution led by Chairman Mao cannot be separated from our united front with the national bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. The four stages of metaphysics are correct for Europe, but they are completely wrong for China, and it is even more wrong to apply the stage theory to the world. Our country has experienced a primitive society, a short-term slavery society, a long-term feudal landlord and small peasant economic society, and a semi-colonial and semi-feudal society. Capitalism. Although Stalin said he was dialectical materialist, he had strong ideas of dialectical thinking and methodology, and he retained serious remnants of metaphysical mechanical materialist view of history in his view of history. Sixth, Stalin confused idealism and agnosticism. Stalin said in the original text, "Idealism denies the possibility of knowing the world and its laws, does not believe in the reliability of our knowledge, and does not believe in objective truth." However, in fact idealism also believes that there is objective truth, and they believe that consciousness is the first objective truth. The pair of questions of Gnosticism and agnosticism are inseparable from the pair of questions of materialism and idealism. Only by answering the latter can the former be answered. However, there are differences. Stalin confused the two basic questions and conflated idealism and idealism. Agnosticism is confused, forgetting to say that idealism also insists on agnosticism. After reading this philosophical work by Stalin, I feel that Stalin is far inferior to Chairman Mao not only in politics, military affairs, and ideological and theoretical innovations, but also in the cultivation of Marxist philosophy and theory. In terms of the cultivation of Marxist, Chairman Mao has always emphasized the need to take the viewpoint of the unity of opposites as the core of dialectics, firmly insisted on the leading role of people in the productive forces, and created the theory of internal contradictions in socialism and the theory of preventing the deterioration of revolutionary leadership collectives under the dictatorship of the proletariat. On contradiction, it pointed out that the superstructure plays a decisive role in production relations and production relations to a certain extent. Politically, Mao Zedong was not only the leader of the Chinese Communist Revolution, but also the leader of the liberation of the Chinese nation. He was the leader of the Revolutionary War and Self-Defense War, and the leader of construction, while Stalin was only Lenin's assistant in the Revolutionary War, and Lenin neither Stalin nor the leader of national liberation. In terms of military affairs, Mao Zedong is the greatest military strategist with the longest military practice, the richest war experience and the most complete military theory in the history of the international communist movement. He is also the only military commander, military strategist, military tactician, military thinker, military theorist, military philosopher, and military poet all in one, led the greatest military force in the large-scale war with the most obvious gap in numbers and weapons in human history. Home. And Stalin's various clumsy performances during the Soviet-German War made him barely a qualified military commander and intermediate-level strategist. Theoretically, Stalin only inherited and developed Lenin's wartime collective mobilization economic system, while Mao Zedong surpassed Lenin's theory and formed the Marxism of colonial and semi-colonial anti-oppression and the construction and consolidation of political power after the proletariat seized power. Mao Zedong thought. It was Stalin's serious remnants of metaphysics, vulgar materialism, and idealistic subjectivism, especially dogmatism, that made him make serious mistakes in the early days of the Soviet-German War. Adventurism in offense, conservatism in defense doctrine, opportunism in retreat. However, it cannot be denied that Stalin wanted to be 30 to 70. He was 70% a Marxist, and he was considered a great statesman and strategist. However, compared with Chairman Mao, Stalin seemed small. China is suffering from a serious and complex political disease. All unrest and people suffering are symptoms and results of this disease. One of the most obvious morbidities is the extreme inequality between rich and poor. The rich are not just lands connecting rice fields, they even deposit their deposits in foreign countries. The poor are not only no land to stand on, but even 3 meals a day are difficult to be sure. However, this is not a simple economic disorder, but a complex political corruption. Inequality between the rich and the poor is an unavoidable natural phenomenon under the private property system. If politics is relatively clear and there are no special forces monopolizing social wealth, money is generally a reward for hard work, and fairness can also compensate for the shortcomings of inequality. Although it is not enough to meet the ideals of others, in such a society, people can still rely on their talents and seek blessings for themselves. Society can not only be stable, but also progress through individual competition. This is the normal health of a capitalist society. Only in this state can there be human rights, democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. Today's China maintains the private property system, but cannot maintain a healthy capitalist society. Special interests have invaded politics, and special forces use political institutions that work for everyone to directly or indirectly benefit private individuals. The spirit of free competition and fair play is almost absent. Those who steal and plunder often get the highest enjoyment, and those who work hard are often exploited by accident. Not only ordinary farmers and public and educational personnel are industrious and poor, but also many law-abiding business people feel that it is difficult to survive under the threat of bureaucratic capital and wealthy capital. On the contrary, those who communicate with the powerful can share the remaining profit. A qualitative and intangible special power group has emerged in society. People outside this group have only 3 options. One is to join the group and help each other into violence. The second is to bow your head and obey, waiting for peril. The third is to speak out and demand reform. Those who take the third path inevitably include some radicals. Anger at the status quo makes them violent in their words and deeds, even taking risks and wanting to use violence to break the status quo. This is the so-called left-leaning by ordinary people. Let us not misunderstand that left deviation is the result of blind obedience or meditation. Sometimes it is out of personal experience. The author once talked with a left-leaning young man, and discovered the subconscious root of his left-leaning. In the narration of his life experience, he told the history of his family's ups and downs. During the anti-Japanese War, the industry that his father had achieved through decades of hard work was invaded by a wealthy family, so the old man became sick and died several times. from the middle rich to the small poor. The exclusive wealth of privileged groups undermines social justice, increases the poverty of ordinary people, and causes unrest in order. They benefit in the short term, but I am afraid that they will inevitably suffer the scourge of social collapse in the long run. This situation is a bit like gastric enlargement caused by overeating, systemic malnutrition caused by stomach disease, and scabies caused by self-poisoning. It is also like a malignant cancer caused by abnormal development of local cell tissue. There is also a serious morbidity that cannot be ignored. According to historical performance, the government is not without the ambition to seek governance. Over the past 10 years, the government has made many decisions and programs related to the war of resistance, founding the country, implementing the constitution and enriching the people. However, according to its reality, although the decision-making plan is grand and beautiful, it is repeatedly discounted as soon as it comes out of the gate of the high-level government, and it is almost a waste of paper. Some of it even becomes a new method for corrupt officials to cheat and seek personal gain. Economic control and demobilization during the anti-Japanese war. The receiving work during the period is an obvious example. The intention of the government and the content of the decree are not necessarily bad, but if the conditions for implementing the decree are not enough, the well-intentioned and good law will deteriorate and become a tyrannical law. In order to implement the construction plan, there must be a sound administrative organization and loyal officials. To have law-abiding officials, there must be strict and fair rewards and punishments. This is the minimum condition for government. Talking about construction and the rule of law without satisfying the minimum conditions is tantamount to deceiving others and oneself. May I ask how many corrupt officials have been punished in the past few years? How many officials? How many profiteers? Even if there are, it is inevitable that most of them belong to the category of thieves who steal the hook. It is also questionable whether the government's intentions are entirely good. Although the government does not intend to make decisions that harm the country and the people, but silently observing some of the measures in recent years, it seems that some of them focus on benefiting the country, for the government, rather than benefiting the people, for the common people. Certain fiscal measures in particular have such suspicions. The slogan "Country First" was applicable during the anti-Japanese war. After demobilization, there should be a new understanding of people first. The biggest disadvantage of valuing the country and despising the people is to cultivate officials' mentality of ignoring the sufferings of the people, which promotes the government's policy of stingy and rich. Government orders cannot be issued, like paralysis. Disregarding people's livelihood is like numbness. Talking about the principle of people's livelihood, but forgetting the true meaning of "for the people" when dealing with the affairs of the people, this is like the amnesia of neurasthenia. China's body politic has been plagued by many diseases since today. When the autocratic monarchy was extremely corrupt in the late Qing dynasty, China once gained the notoriety of the sick man of East Asia. Fortunately, when he was dying, an outstanding doctor of medicine, Mr. Sun Yat-sen, came out to prescribe the right medicine and treat him. He used revolutionary surgery to remove the taint of autocracy, and used the founding of the Three People's Principles to cultivate the vitality of the country. This set of medical methods of treating both internal and external and treating both the root and the root is very clever. Unfortunately, Mr. Sun's surgical operation has achieved results, but medical recuperation has no significant effect. When Mr. Sun passed away in the 14th year of the Republic of China, the warlord forces obstructed the implementation of the principle of civil rights and people's livelihood. The 15-year Northern Expedition can be said to be a surgical operation to eradicate the warlord's poison. Unexpectedly, under the pressure of internal and external troubles, not only the internal medicine recuperation failed to make progress, but a new poison of the privileged group occurred. This obviously required surgery again. The disease in China is now close to dying, but it has not reached the hopeless situation. Now is the last chance for treatment. First of all, we must use quick and decisive surgical operations to cut off all the cancers and sores that are entrenched in the government and society. Even if you are as close as Quan Cai, you must learn from Duke Zhou's righteousness to destroy relatives. Even if you are as expensive as the air, you must learn from Shang Zi's punishment without hierarchy. To shoot a rioter who robs rice will bring tears claiming right and justice. To arrest 10 thugs who disturb the law and order is to punish 100 corrupt officials who broke the law. The officials of the people, the generals of the army, and the people in charge of instigating the people's gold tide must be punished fairly by the laws of the country. The author believes that after performing this operation to remove rot in the morning, you can receive the effect of revival in the afternoon. From this, China's society will begin to restore justice, the hearts of the people across the country will be lifted up immediately, and the prestige of the government will be established immediately. This is 100 times more effective than any declaration or meeting. Secondly, it should be supplemented by internal medicine recuperation, and the principle of people's livelihood should be implemented sincerely and steadfastly. It will take effect even if it is discounted. Only by sincerely accepting the ancient motto of the people are the foundation of the country and implementing the new policy of government for the people can we win over the people. To replace country first with people's livelihood first as the highest principle of governance is in line with the true spirit of Mr. Sun's nationalism. Although the effect of internal medicine is relatively slow, there will be considerable achievements in 3 to 5 years. The average person is also anxious about current financial and economic problems. This problem is not the last crux. Although economics is the foundation of politics, politics is the key to economics. If the dirty and chaotic political situation is not reformed first, any economic reform or construction will either benefit private parties or disturb the public. Even if it works for a while, it is difficult to sustain it for a long time. If we want to cure China's economic disease, we must first cure China's political disease.